This idea that you can just go and I'm having a hard day, so I'm going to go have a bath and a glass of wine. You're going to have a hard day tomorrow too. And you're going to have a hard day after that. And it's like, you have to choose your suffering in this life. And the mental health conversation in social media is so fucking soft. And look, this is where I get in trouble as the trauma coach guy. This happens all the time to me. People will be like, how can you be the trauma guy when you are so aggressive? I'm like, because life is fucking hard for everyone. And you're trying to make it easier. And the easier you make your life, the harder your life becomes.
Michael, welcome to Discover More.
Thanks, Benoit. I'm excited to be here with you, man. Thank you for that intro. It's funny when I hear that, I'm like, that sounds insane.
Yeah, I told my fiance that, who are you? You're coming up, and she's a physician, and she was like, wow. So with that being said, given your extensive traumatic backgrounds, do you still believe that God was punishing you throughout your traumatic upbringing?
First off, phenomenal question. My thought and feeling towards a God of my understanding today is very different than what it may have been or looked like when I was younger. And today, what it feels and looks like is very much that, and this is a hard thing to believe unless you choose to believe it, that we choose our path, that as celestial and eternal beings, we have chosen the life that we live in this timeline. And for a long time, it was me beating up myself in the world, being mad all the time. And then I realized, like, actually, I have to turn my pain into purpose. And so a short answer to your question would be, I don't believe it's the same thing anymore.
So how do we separate the fact that we are often victims of larger circumstances that's beyond our control versus doubling down on this victim mindset that you often talk about?
Yeah, look, that's a great question. And I think it comes down to acknowledgement, like just looking nakedly at your existence and having acceptance of the reality that you live in, not the fictional reality that you wish that you lived in. And when you do that, there is a sense of freedom that comes along with that. And while it is incredibly difficult, and I don't want to take the pain or victimhood from anyone, because trust me, I get it. But you have to truly ask yourself, like, what value does being a victim play in my life?
In a recent interview, Michael, you said that trauma or abuse is a thief of one's identity. Can you elaborate, given what you just said?
Yeah, I think growing up and being in these traumatic experiences, you actually learn how to turn off who you are. You learn how to not be a human being. And that is a survival mechanism. And so if you're like me, the most dangerous thing that you can do as a kid is to like have an opinion. And in having that opinion, there's pain that comes along with it. And if the brain is always trying to evaluate the world for survival, if it feels pain, it will move away from that thing. Well, what do you do when the pain that you have to suffer for is being you? Well, you stop.
How do you reconcile with different crashing realities? Because not everyone has the level of self-introspection that you have, and not everyone has the experience of pain teachers. And in terms of like Mount Rushmore of people who've internalized and reclaimed their manhood, their humanity, you're definitely on top.
I wasn't, though. Right? So to create a very human aspect out of this conversation, I want to be clear. Like, dude, I've made huge mistakes in my life. I have been a fucking nightmare. I have ruined relationships, been in tremendous amounts of debt, been morbidly obese, didn't take care of myself. And it wasn't until I made a decision where I was like, I'm actually going to become this person here. It wasn't until I made that decision to be self-aware that my life changed. There were elements of it, especially young, where I looked at my life and I was like, I don't want this. This isn't for me. But the real growth did not start to take place until I really evaluated the role that I was playing in my own journey.
I talked about this on the podcast where awareness without action becomes a burden. I think in 2024, everyone has this heightened awareness, heightened knowledge with all this podcasting like ours or self-help books or other avenues for growth. Yet I feel like the level of action is unmatched and misaligned with the level of increased awareness.
Yeah, it is. And those people's lives will never be different. And you know, there's a terminology around that. You can call it mental masturbation, where people are just consuming. It's consuming. And they're like, my life isn't different. I encourage people all the time to stop listening to my podcast. I encourage people all the time to stop buying my books, to leave my coaching programs, go live. Like, get the framework, understand what you're trying to do and accomplish, and then go and execute. I mean, you know this as someone who has been a leader in many ways. With the game plan, if you follow it, the likelihood of success is much higher than if you do absolutely nothing.
Let's go into your mirror reflection moment. I think that was a catalyzing moment that really, I think, empowered you going from this inaction to actually doing something and actually reclaiming the power that you felt like you've been losing for a long time.
I don't even know where that really came from, right? Because I'll paint you a little bit of a picture. You know, I'm 350 pounds, smoking 2 packs a day, drinking myself to sleep. And this one Saturday morning, I'm laying in bed, smoking a joint and watching the CrossFit games while I'm eating chocolate cake. And I'm like, what is happening in my fucking life right now, man? And I went to the bathroom and I looked at myself in the mirror, and Benoit, dude, I just went to war with myself. Nothing nice happened in that moment at all. But I needed that moment tremendously. I needed to kick my own ass because I was looking at life and I was being everything everyone ever said I was going to be. I was overweight. I was a loser. I was like killing myself. I was ruining every relationship I touched. My brother wouldn't talk to me. I'm 50 grand in debt. You know, I'd put a gun in my fucking mouth. Like, dude, I was a complete loser. And the hard part is, like, that ties into that identity thing we talked about a couple minutes ago. And looking in that mirror, man, I just asked myself a question after I went to war with myself. And a lot of that in that moment was me berating myself. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It was not nice, but it needed to be done. Like, it truly needed to be done. And I asked myself a question. It's literally written on my bathroom mirror right now. This question that I ask myself every day of my life. And it's, what are you willing to do to have the life that you want to have? And in the moment, the answer was no excuses, just results.
What does that mean, going to war with yourself?
Brutal honesty. Like, unfiltered, naked truth. Like, in this way that is so unbelievably radical that it's hard to comprehend unless you've done it. Most people are not willing to be that honest with themselves. When I stood in front of that mirror, it wasn't only about the decisions that I was making, but dude, it was about acknowledging the truth. In the intro that you gave me, which was phenomenal, by the way, and I do appreciate that a lot, you know more about me than people who knew me for 25 years. Think about that. Like, I was keeping everything so close to the chest. Shame, guilt, embarrassment. There's a lot of reasons why we do these things. But when I went to war with myself, it was really looking at and evaluating my life and asking myself, like, what am I doing? What have I done to put myself in this scenario? And what's interesting is there was no therapy in my life then. There was no coach in my life. There was no personal development. I was just tired of my own bullshit, and I called myself out, point blank.
As you know, Michael, that everything in society oscillates. 10 years ago, mental health and emotionality were not real. But now on TikTok and this almost guru culture, everyone talks about mental health and trauma and feelings. And of course, as we know, truth is in the middle. I share that because I think people have this illusion that self-care is only about pampering yourself. Do a yoga session, read a book, spend $150 for a week of therapy without doing additional work. But what you're saying, the undercurrent of that is self-work can be fucking brutal at times.
It always is. Like, when is it not? Like, we choose our struggles in life, right? And we make the decision as the individual what our struggle will be. And I realized this, like, so 26 to 30 years old were very, very, very hard years for me because they were the first time the pendulum started swinging in the other direction. And I was constantly making mistakes and constantly messing up and constantly mad at myself because I'd take a step forward and 10 steps backwards. And then one day I realized it was like, you have to choose your struggle. And you can choose the struggle of having a lackluster life, a mediocre existence, and dying with regret, or you can choose the struggle of going and building and creating something incredible. And I didn't know something incredible would be what my life is now. Like, this almost feels nonsensical to me. But in the beginning, what it was very simple. Can I be a man of value for myself first? Can I go look in that mirror and not hate myself? And I can promise you I had to struggle myself to that place. And this mental health conversation we're having now, like, I'm glad we're having the conversation. So let's be clear, like, I don't hate it, but most of it's bullshit. The vast majority of it is bullshit. And you, as a therapist, you know this idea that you can just go and I'm having a hard day, so I'm going to go have a bath and a glass of wine. You're going to have a hard day tomorrow too. And you're going to have a hard day after that. And it's like, you have to choose your suffering in this life. And the mental health conversation and social media is so fucking soft. And look, this is where I get in trouble as the trauma coach guy. This happens all the time to me. People be like, how can you be the trauma guy when you are so aggressive? I'm like, because life is fucking hard for everyone. And you're trying to make it easier. And the easier you make your life, the harder your life becomes.
The only two guarantees in life are taxes and death. Fairness was never guaranteed. And I think people often forget that.
And nobody owes you understanding. Why do you think you're owed something? And look, I'm the kid who was homeless at 8 years old. I lived with over 30 different families. Like, my mom was a drug addict and alcoholic. My stepdad was 6'3", 250, a fucking monster beating up a 7-year-old. My grandmother, who adopted me when I was 12, I'm biracial, black and white. My grandma was racist. Like, bro, we had a copy of Hitler's autobiography, Mein Kampf, on our kitchen table. Dead serious. My uncle's in the Aryan Brotherhood. Half my friends are in prison. I got a message on Facebook the other day from one of my buddies who's been in prison for 20 years. You know, my 3 childhood best friends have been murdered. You think anybody cares? Like, really, do you really think anybody cares? No, because they have their own life and their own problems and their own things to deal with. And life isn't fair. So what? Like, and I say that with love. Like, I know it's a hard thing to reconcile, but I say it with love because if you're willing to look at your life and you understand that you have to be the one who cares, not other people, not that other people will not, because they certainly will. And people are, I believe, are inherently good. But it's like, if you're not willing to look at your life in truth and understand that fairness doesn't matter, and you have to, all right, so this question I asked myself, what are you willing to do to have the life that you want to have? The answer being no excuses, just results, effectively means that if you want to have a life to whatever capacity it means for you, of success, of abundance, of health, happiness, wealth, love, what it really distills itself down into is a very simple understanding. Life is about doing what is required, not about doing what you want.
Given what you just said, what do you think in retrospect was the hardest, and you can define that as you may, the hardest aspect of your childhood trauma and pain teachers that you had to move through? And I don't like the word overcome, because whether we like it or not, these become a part of our experiences, genetics and epigenetics, right?
Shame, man. Tremendous amount of shame. Being embarrassed of my life, being embarrassed of the fact that I was always the dumbest kid in class, being embarrassed of the fact that, you know, my mom would show up to wrestling meets wasted, you know, that my dad never I never met him except one time when I was 5 years old. And as I like look back at it, it might not even have been him.
Mm.
You know, it was shame about my finger and lying to people about what happened, lying to the police when they would come to our house, lying about the bruises on my body, like shame. I mean, that's a lot, man. It's like I'm surprised I'm even capable as a human being to navigate the world in any capacity. And that is the hardest teacher. And shame is such a difficult thing to navigate when you are that young. Like I felt shame as early as like 6 years old and
Mm.
just being unbelievably embarrassed to walk the halls of school, to go outside of my home. And that taught me a lot at a very young age. But what's interesting is also as a gift in a lot of ways, because I look at my life now and I'm not embarrassed of anything like ever anymore. And it is such a freeing gift where if you're like, hey, you're stupid and I hate your nose ring and your tattoos are dumb and that shirt you're wearing looks like garbage, I'm like, cool. you know so it's kind of one of those things where when you control your emotions, you control your life.
I want to go to what you said earlier. We have to choose our suffering. Of course, suffering is the number one noble truth of Buddhism. I often tell my patients, because I deal with addiction, that if you do not choose your addictions, the addictions will find you. Similarly, if you do not choose and confront your sufferings will come find you.
I could not agree more. It makes me think of the idle hands are the devil's playground, and so much of what I think happens in my life was, here's what I think happens to a lot of people. I see this in the clients that I work with too. They have unclear direction in life. And I tell people this, a ship without a compass will land on any island. And that's effectively what happens to people. They're looking at their lives and they are just living life. They are not living life with intention, with clarity, or with purpose. And they're wondering why their life is a disaster. And I always tell people, if you show me your calendar, I'll show you why your life is a disaster. And it's because we get obsessed and consumed with things that don't actually matter. Or worse, because you've not taken every December, last week of the year, I sit down and I write my strategic plan for the upcoming year in health, wealth, and relationships. And I identify 4 to 5 key goals in each one of these areas that I move towards. Now, Benoit, you know this as well as I do. That doesn't mean you'll hit every goal, but at least it means I have a direction. And one of the things that has done in my life is it's given me purpose. People talk about all the time, I don't know what my purpose is. Like, yeah, no shit, because you haven't sat down and tried to figure it out. And then you blame the world for why your life isn't what you want it to be. And purpose is, in my opinion, it's not about chasing money. It's not about fame and celebrity. It's not about the next car or the nicest outfit. It's about fulfillment. And do you feel happy about the life that you're living? And most people don't. And when you sit down, here's the difficulty in this, right? Because when you sit down with them and you say, tell me your goals, they're so terrified of it that they don't even know how to get the words out of their mouth. And my thesis on stuckness is that more people are scared of success than they are of failure.
Can you elaborate that?
Well, think about this. Inherently, we're used to failure. Failure is the nomenclature for understanding, right? If you really think about it and you break it down, you look at all these experiences in life where it didn't work, and that's where the lessons come. Successes, especially successes that come easily, carry and garner no weight in your life. Think about the easiest thing you ever accomplished. Like, it didn't make your life better. It didn't fulfill you in any capacity. It's just something that you did. But the struggle, I'm going to do this thing over here. I'm going to walk this path. I'm going to create this life. I'm going to navigate all the ups and downs and left and rights that come along with it. And on a long enough timeline, I'll get a look at this thing that I've accomplished and feel some sort of way. That's what drives us. right? But what happens is, think about this from just an autonomic nervous system response to failure, your body goes, oh, don't do that again. Oh, I didn't like the way that failure felt. But here's what happens if your brain is trapped in this understanding that failure is what life should be, right? I'll give you a perfect example. Growing up, the bill collectors were constantly calling our house. Water is getting turned off, electricity is getting turned off, heat's getting turned off, bills are stacking on top of bills, on top of bills, on top of bills. We get evicted. I lived with over 30 families. What do you think my teens look like? The same thing, right? And now I'm in my 20s, I'm on my own. What starts to happen? Let me give you context about the status of an emotional home. I'm 26 years old. I work for a Fortune 10 company. I have made almost $1 million with no high school diploma. It was just literally given to me out of 1.6 GPA. That you don't graduate high school with that, right? And I was $50,000 in debt, making 200 grand a year, bill collectors calling me, eviction notice on my door, borrowing money from my girlfriend who lived with me to pay the rent, and going paycheck to paycheck. All of the success that one could ever, dude, Benoit, man, I made more money in my 20s than everyone I knew. Nobody made more money than me in my friends group. Yet, I was the brokest one of all of us. Why? Because here is success, this unknown thing, this variable for which I do not understand because I never was able to bear witness to it. And yet I have it because I've worked my face off. Dude, I worked so hard to do that. And yet I sabotaged it because my emotional home was still tied into the limiting belief of lack, of not enoughness, of that I don't deserve more because of the experiences of childhood, which told me that failure is actually what I'm supposed to have. And over here, when I got to touch success, I destroyed it, which that's why my thesis is that more people are afraid of success than they are of failure, because the second they get success, they go back to their emotional home of comfort because that's what they believe is right for them.
Yeah, I personally feel like failure just means an interruption of your expectations, right? You're used to a certain level of patterns, pattern recognition, the ANS you talked about, automatic nervous systems. And we humans, evolutionarily speaking, are innately gravitate towards patterns because patterns means familiarity. Familiarity means safety. And that's what trauma is. It's interruptions of perceived safety based on what happens to you out of your control.
The really difficult part of that is without awareness, you will stay in that until the day you die.
Let's go practical for a sec. How do you teach your clients to foster their power of discernment? Because that's what I'm sensing from what you just said.
It starts with action and looking at your life and assessing the truth, which we've talked about, and in that truth, making a decision about a simple change that you can start making immediately. One of the things, and I say this all the time, and I say this with all due respect, trust me, if I could go back in time, I would have hired a coach before I hired a therapist. Because what I really needed were behavioral changes. I really needed something different in my day-to-day. The understanding, and especially when I got deeper into all these different therapeutic modalities, played a tremendous role in the analytical side of my brain and my understanding and the emotional capacity that I would grow over years. But dude, in the beginning, it was like the hardest thing I could do was get out of bed and brush my teeth. Like dead serious. And it was so impossibly difficult because I was so depressed and anxious, because I hated the world so much, because I was so angry and upset at everything. And so what I do with clients and the people that I work with is I sit down with them and I look at and evaluate their life with them. I'm not making decisions for them. I don't know how to help people. Let me be very clear about that. I've coached thousands of people and I don't know how to help any of them, but I show them the thing that they already know and I allow them the space to actually step into it, knowing that it's okay to actually step into it. And so we look at it and we evaluate, and I go, okay, well, what kind of life do you want to have? Why don't you have the life? What interference are you playing in your own success? And then start at one. People make this mistake all the time. They try to do a 180 on their life where they go, I'm going to change everything today. And so on Sunday night, they're in bed and they're like, tomorrow's the day. And then they go and crush it. This is what's so crazy. They fucking crush it. And Monday's the greatest day of their life. And then Tuesday comes. And then Tuesday, they're right back to where they were. Because instead of just trying to bite this off bit by bit, they try to explode their whole identity. And I would argue that maybe there's 0.001% of people on planet Earth who could do that successfully. I think the vast majority of us, because you're effectively brainwashing yourself while retraining your brain, while trying to understand that you're effectively shifting behavioral patterns, it's going to take time. And so the most practical thing I could say in that is to allot yourself both patience and grace. Patience, because it's going to take a lot longer than you think it is, like a disgusting amount of time. And two, grace, because to err is to human, and you are a human, and you are going to make mistakes. And the second you say, I'll never do that thing, you'll end up doing it. And then you're going to rinse and repeat that until you die. And so it's kind of like, can you give yourself some grace in this process, knowing that, yes, you have to raise your standards. It's a must. You have to break the patterns. It's a must. You have to do all of these things that lead you down the path of success. But ultimately, it's really about evaluating the simple changes that you can make today. Because if you don't make a simple change today, you can't make a simple change tomorrow.
That reminds me of a quote as an entrepreneur that most people overestimate what they can do in the short term and underestimate what they can achieve in the long term, right?
Yeah.
And that's the reason why 98% of New Year resolutioners quit when that January hits that 31st. I just want to share something practical technique that you alluded to. It's called behavior activation. I just told this to a patient yesterday, actually, so he was telling me that, it's hard for me to wake up at the same time. And when you wake up on an erratic schedule, that impacts your momentum for the day. So we talked about barriers. What are the barriers? Because the key to behavior activations or activating your desired behavior is to exert the minimum effort, like you said, that yields the most outcome, incremental changes. And the conclusion was, I asked them, buy a digital clock, buy an actual clock that's not your phone. And the sole identity and the purpose of that clock is to activate your behavior of waking up. Because he's like, I've been using my phone, but it doesn't work. I said, listen, your phone symbolizes and represents too many different things. Social media, text, email, etc. You have to segregate sole identity. And he's been trying it, and I'm curious to follow up on Mondays to see how that's going.
Yeah, I love that. And in fact, one of the things that I think about when I look at the changes I've been able to make in my life and even in the lives of my clients is that exact same process. It is like, how do you use a great terminology, segregate the identity. And it's like, you have to look at your life from the nuance, right? And you really have to break down who it is that you are, what you represent, and who you want to be. And then you chip away at the process on a day-to-day basis. And in doing so, what you'll find is everything that you're looking for. But again, you're going to underestimate the capability you have over the course of your lifetime and vastly overestimate, probably in an egoic way, what you can do in a week. And I mean, we're all guilty of this. Like, I don't think this is you or I sitting here on a pulpit preaching at each other, or anyone for that matter. I think it's just learned experience. You look at the journey of your life and you come to create these understandings. And the more that you understand, the more likelihood of success that you have. And so it's a little thing like the clock, like the toothbrush, like the how you dress when you leave. Do you make your bed? Do you show up on time? Dude, here's a great example, actually. Yesterday, I go to the grocery store. I'm a little bit under the weather. I needed to get some more tea. I go to the grocery store and I bought a fig jam. And I go to checkout. I do the self-checkout thing. I packed everything. I paid. I started loading the groceries in the cart. And I looked and I left the fig jam in the basket. I hadn't paid for it. An older version of me, Benoit, would have been like, whatever, and left. Right? I wouldn't have thought about it twice. And as a kid, I had to steal food to survive. That is a part of my autonomic nervous system, right? I have trained that to be an automatic response. I will do what it takes to survive, i.e., I will steal the food, right? And as 8 years old, stealing food to survive, like you get that trained into you very young. I'm 39 in a couple of months. I'm looking at this moment. And I'm having a real moment yesterday at the grocery store. And I asked myself a question. I said, what are your standards? And I went and I took the stupid jar of fig jam and I scanned it and I fucking paid for it. Why? Because breaking patterns, even if you've been doing this work like I have for 14 years, requires your daily attention to the nuance. Because it would have been very easy, which a lot of people do this, to walk out of the grocery store. But that's not who I am. That's not my representation of a man any longer. And that is certainly not my standard for myself or for other people.
If you repeat something long enough, good or bad, even though I don't like the dichotomy of that, it eventually becomes who you are. We are what we repeat over time. I want to go into accountability, since not everyone has a tribe, not everyone has cultivated heightened awareness or practices as we do. Mr. Bush is one of your most influential teachers that believed in you and respected your dignity as a person, regardless of your grades or your tendency to skip classes. Why must we hold each other accountable if we care?
Yeah, Mr. Bush was an interesting dude. He was a teacher. I want to give context to this because I think it matters. He was a teacher at my high school, Northwest High School, Indianapolis. It eventually got shut down. It was listed as a dropout factory, one of the worst high schools in America. The year that I graduated and went to summer school and got my diploma because it was given to me. I don't even like to say graduated. It feels weird. But the year that they were like, we're done with you. Good luck. Mr. Bush was my business teacher. So ironies of all ironies. He was also the basketball coach. I am horrible at basketball, even though I'm almost 6'4". Like that is not a correlation, I promise you. But I loved wrestling. I like contact sports because I like violence, and so I wrestled. But every day we'd have to walk from the gym into the wrestling room, and we'd cross the basketball players every day. And Mr. Bush and I had vaguely known each other. The last semester of my senior year, he was my business teacher, my first period class that started at like 7 a.m. or something disgusting, which is way too early for children. And I walk up to him on like the first or second day of the last semester, and I go, hey, I'm going to be honest. And I was honest with him. I go, I'm not coming to your class. It's too early, and I got too much life going on. At this point in my life, Benoit, and I don't talk about this a lot, my grandmother was in a coma. My mother was back in rehab. My little brother and I were living in this house by ourselves, literally scraping together change from the couch to buy food. My aunt and my uncle were not supporting us. Nobody in my family gave a shit. And I was out at night selling drugs or hanging out with my girlfriend because I was 18. So use your imagination. and Mr. Bush, to his credit, as a teacher at that point for probably 15 years, he had said to me, look, I get it. Just check in with me and do homework, and we will figure something out. And I did not check in with him or do homework one time in that entire semester. And they put up the graduation list on the wall or whatever, and my girlfriend calls me. I'm at home, stoned, playing video games, Diablo 2, shout out.
Shout out.
And dude, I must have put like 400 hours into that game as a kid. It's disgusting. And my girlfriend calls me and she goes, hey, your name's not on the graduation list. And I was like, what? She goes, your name's not on the graduation list. And I'm like, so I get in my car. I immediately go to school. It's the fastest I ever went to school in my whole life. And I go upstairs, top left corner of the building, Mr. Bush's classroom. I wait for the period to end. I come out and I get into a shouting match with this man. 18-year-old boy shouting match with a grown adult. All right. And he says to me, first off, don't talk to me like that. You're a child. And I was like, in my mind, I was like, I'm not a child, dude. I'm in these streets. Like I've been through some shit. You don't know me. And I go, why did you fail me? And he said this is one of the most important lessons of my entire life. He says, I didn't fail you. You failed yourself. And so you're going to summer school. And in summer school, this really weird thing happened. The teacher, like this dude could not care less. There's no way he could care less about being a teacher or the fact that these handful of delinquent kids needed to take this one class. It's crazy. There were like 25 kids in this business class for summer school. And like the third weekend, he comes up to me. He goes, it's so clear you don't want to be here. We're just going to give you the diploma and the streets are going to take care of you. And I got fired from the warehouse job I was working at the time, like a day later, or it might have been the same day. I don't remember. And I remember sitting in my car and I was like trying to figure out the solution for all of this, for homelessness, for abuse, for poverty, for learning disabilities, for all of the things that I had going on. And I ultimately came to realize that if I made $100,000 a year, my life would be better. Now, obviously, because of the context of where we've already been, that's not how it played out. But one of the things that happened in that moment is I realized the importance of follow through. I realized the importance of when you make an agreement with someone, you do it. I also realized how unbelievably important it is that as an individual, you do what you say you're going to do for yourself, because nobody had put me in that situation. But on the backside of that, I got uninvited from every graduation party. All of my friends stopped talking to me, all of them. I have one friend from high school now, right? I get acquaintances like people who randomly hit me up. I think that kind of comes with the territory, but I have nobody in my life from that time. What I understood in that experience transformed my life forever. Now, the factor of that I didn't understand until much later is you can have accountability in your life, but accountability without clarity is a dangerous game. And so that's how I ended up at 25 years old, 26 years old in the situation I was in. Fast forward a couple years, I was at a random Best Buy in Noblesville, Indiana. And I mean, it could not be more random. And I bumped into Mr. Bush. That was terrible. Dude, I've met celebrities. I've spoken on stages in front of 10,000 people. I have millions of people listen to this podcast every year, blah, blah, blah. Nothing in my life has ever made me as nervous as walking up to him. And I was shaking and I was so fucking scared. And I walked up to him and I just went, hey, man, I don't know if you remember me. And he goes, didn't you used to have a little afro back in high school? I go, yeah. He goes, I remember you. I go, your decision to stand up to me. This is the way I phrased it to him. I go, your decision to stand up to me changed my life forever. Thank you for making me be accountable. Accountability is everything in this journey. And being a victim allows you the space to forego accountability. And in doing so, you will lose the opportunity to have a fulfilling life. And so the more that you play this role of the victim, you're making a decision to not be accountable for your daily decisions and choices that you make, the more high the likelihood is that on your deathbed, the final thoughts in your head will be, I regret this life. And if you have accountability, this doesn't mean culpability. So let's be very clear about that. I don't think we're responsible for abuse, for trauma, for chaos, for having parents that sucked or make us overachievers or underachievers, anything in between. But everything in your life right now in this moment is your responsibility. And it is not until you sit in that truth that your life will become different. And the only thing, Benoit, I'm not scared of anything, dude. I'm really not, except one thing, that I would die with regret. And if I die with regret, I will know it's because I did not hold to myself to a high enough standard through accountability. It's very simple.
Just like you showing up today for a 4-hour back-to-back recording with sinus infection, because you abide by a certain level of truth and responsibility. I love playing game with words because language is how we shape our internal reality and therefore external reality. Responsibility versus reaction, or responding versus reacting. Most people don't think about the fundamental differences. As you said, responsibility is taking ownership of the circumstances at hand and choosing to respond based on your conditions. Reacting is just you're reacting based on what's happening to you. There's no ownership. There's very little conscientious decision making. And I agree with you that we have to respond because we matter. And because we matter, we have to do something about it if we don't like something in our lives.
Responding is interesting, right? Like I love that you use this dichotomy because on this one hand, being responsive is a survival mechanism, right? But on the other hand, I think that being responsive is also about navigating what's actually in front of you. Right? Because I think that there's this element of like responsibility that is forward facing that will pull you into the future. But I think you have to respond as well to what's happening in this moment. And there's the emotional response, which generally speaking does not work out for anyone. And then there's like the practical, thought out, cognizant response that gives you the ability to game plan. I am a little bit of a dork, and the thing that I love to do when I need downtime is to game. I don't game a lot because I don't have a lot of downtime because I'm very, very busy. And I do that intentionally, right? Because I know that if I have too much free time, I'll go my life up. but about once every 2 months or more, depending on what's happening in my life, I will game for a whole day. I will just like clear the calendar. I'm going to chill. I'm going to play a game. And I'm playing this game called Ghosts of Tsushima. And it is about a samurai. And he's having this conversation with his uncle. And his uncle tells him that an effective samurai controls their emotions. And I think about that a lot because in responsiveness, right, and being responsive to a scenario, if you control your emotions in that response, the likelihood of an optimal outcome is exponentially higher. However, most people respond emotionally to the circumstances in front of them. And so reason goes out the door. And so now you're looking at your life. This is the same way that crimes of passion happen, where you're like, I can't believe that guy killed his girlfriend and himself and all. And you're like, well, it was an emotional response. Very likely that wasn't premeditated. Very rarely do you have premeditated crimes of passion. Very rarely. And so now you're in this situation where maybe you just got into an argument with your partner. And then your brain goes, oh, they don't love me. I knew this was going to happen. They suck. I'm worthless. I don't matter. I'm not important. This is why I don't trust people. You're just like my dad, blah, blah. And then you go down this emotional thing. If you take a pause, and I teach my clients this all the time, the peace is in the pause.
Mm.
Peace. The peace is in the pause. If you have to react, because you have to react, there's just no way around it. You are always going to be reactive. There's always something happening in your life. If you react in a space of pause, you take a breath, a moment, 5 moments, whatever you need, and you address the thing in front of you that is happening in your life, the likelihood that you will have a successful outcome is much higher than the likelihood that you'll have a successful outcome in a response that is emotionally charged. And want to say this in a kind way, if your life is constantly fucked up, it's because you don't know how to control yourself.
Mm.
And so that's where this thing about like responsibility comes into play, and looking at your life and asking like, what life do I want to have? And you're like, well, I want to have a life of peace and joy and hope and love and fulfillment and kindness and grace and patience. How are you going to do that if you're emotionally responsive all the time? You're just not. But if you give yourself the ability to think through everything that's happening every day, and you get into really shifting your default mode network, right? From this hyper-responsive place where you're always in chaos, and you move it and you take it and you look at it and go, okay, if my default mode is this crazy, unbelievable response to everything, i.e., I spill the milk and I destroy myself, like your default mode network is a little bit off here. Like, how do we switch you into this other central executive functioning network where you can actually observe, where you can let go, where you can exist, where you can be free, where you can still respond, but you respond in peace? If I spill the milk today, the almond milk, because I'm dairy free, if I spill the almond milk today, do you know what I do? I go, oh, that sucks, and I get a towel. If I spilled the almond milk 20 years ago, oh, you fucking idiot, look, I don't even like saying this. I got chills just now. I don't like referring to myself like this, but I want to do this for context for people to understand what happens. You spill that milk 20 years ago, you destroy yourself, and you wonder why your life sucks. And it's so much of it, you talked about language, that language begins in the here and now, is looking at and evaluating first and foremost the way that you're talking to yourself. Because I can assure you, and I mean this genuinely, if you fucking said some of the shit you said to yourself to me, I would punch you in the face. Real talk. And you're expecting to be successful? How in the world can you reconcile that ideation of success with constant negativity for oneself? And so it's like, even in the moments when you make mistakes, your emotional response has to be measured and calculated and calibrated towards who you want to be in your future planning.
And I just want to zoom in on a very important concept. You highlighted emotional response and the foregoing of logic. A lot of my patients say the same thing. They're like, I don't understand how I did that. I don't know why I wasn't thinking more. And a lot of the emotional response is predicated on anger. And anger is a secondary emotion. Fear is a primary emotion. And I tell them, do you know what's the first thing that goes offline when your amygdala, your fear center, takes over? Is your neocortex, which is a thinking brain. Neocortex is what separates humans from mammals, even though humans are the mammals with the biggest brains, right? So that makes sense. You literally are incapable of being logical in light of emotions. That's how our brains are comprised of. And bringing this back to the beginning of conversation, you said that we have to take a pause, right? We have to evaluate, and we have to give grace for ourselves. Because you talked about, without grace, you're not changing your automatic thoughts. And most people's automatic thoughts are negative self-talk.
Yeah, well, think about this. I want to go into this for a second, because fear, and I took a note here because, like, even though you're interviewing me, I'm always taking notes when I speak to brilliant people. The response that's secondary in anger based off fear is really about one thing: safety. People respond like that because they don't feel safe. And so if you look at that and you understand that the reason I'm freaking out at my girlfriend or my husband is fear tied into a lack of safety because when my parents did this when I was 8 years old, I felt unsafe. And that is a biological response to a stressor that your body has adapted to for survival. Like, we are so mechanical. Like, it's unbelievable how mechanical we are, how the input output systems of our lives, even though we all live different lives, are all the same mechanisms. You don't have a different brain than I do. Now, maybe your prefrontal cortex is a little bit bigger or small. Maybe your amygdala is bigger or small. Maybe your hippocampus is bigger or smaller, or activate or don't activate because of different stimuli. But ultimately, we all have the same things, minus the fact that you might be a sociopath or a psychotic, which is very unlikely. Right? It's very unlikely. And so when you're looking at this and you're evaluating it, well, if your partner triggers you, which good, they should. I'm pro triggers. I'm like, good, get triggers. Stop trigger warning people. Stop being babies. Fucking stop being soft. Address I love when I get triggered. You know why? Because it makes me have to go, oh, what is that tied to? Why is that when Benoit said that, my emotional response was to fight him? What is that? Oh, is that shame? Is that guilt? Is that pain? Is that lack? Is that my need to be right? Is that my ego? Is that me interfering with myself? I don't know what it is. So now think about this, because I'm going into your question. If that is my reaction from someone else, now what is my reaction when it's about me? The words that we use with ourselves are so incredibly important, because if someone else is triggering anger based on fear, meaning this lack of safety, what if you're doing that to yourself 45, 50 times a day? Oh my God, your life sounds horrible to me. Why would you do that to yourself? The one thing that we get to control is our own self-narrative. Now, look, controlling one's self-narrative is a tremendous amount of work. There is no way that you could ever look at this as something simple, because we are complex. Even though we are machines and we're very binary, input in, input out, the complexities of the nuances of the things that drive each of us independently are so substantial that to negate it is actually to do yourself a massive disservice. But if that substantiality is tied into you trying to understand who you are based in your own self-loathing and hate, how are you going to discover truth? You're not. And because you're not able to discover truth, because you're so unkind to yourself, you're always going to be an asshole to yourself first and foremost, but then that impacts the people around you in your world. And you're asking yourself, why am I like this? Why did I react this way? Well, because if you're putting yourself into your sympathetic nervous system, which you have the capability of doing, or into your parasympathetic, which you have the capability of doing, like, again, because you have the ability to control your self-narrative. But if you're putting yourself into this fight or flight response on a daily basis, starting with the words that you use, again, my question to you is, how will you be successful? I just don't know how you can. There are people who are very successful in many areas of life who maybe drive through life in anger or fear, or they push through. But I can promise you they don't have success in all areas. Their health will be great. They're ripped, they're jacked, they're in the gym all the time, relationships garbage, and they have no money. Or their relationship is great, maybe on the surface, but secretly they're codependent, and their money sucks and so does their health. And then on the third option is you got these people who they're unbelievably wealthy. Why do you keep seeing all these billionaires on their seventh divorce? You don't think that means something? Or you see the guy in the tech company who's done something really well, but he's morbidly obese, i.e. me, 26 years old, 350 pounds, horrible relationship, making more money than anybody that I knew. When you can get I call it the triad, when you can get your health, wealth, and relationships in accordance with the person that you want to be, it only begins and is predicated on your own self-talk. Like, I truly believe that. Like, I really do. Like, I believe more than anything, the words you use with yourself are going to be the cornerstone of success or failure in your life.
I love the power and the importance of emotional congruence that you talked about. I want to ride this train because I love relationships. And you know this just as I do. People, because of their trauma and the past that were larger than they were, people who do not know how to be compassionate and love themselves, they do not know how to love others, period. And they do not know how to receive love. Because all relationships are extensions and reflections of a relationship with oneself, full stop. And your story speaks to that. And self-sabotage, especially in addiction recovery, because I'm an alcoholic in recovery. I've been in remission for about 4 years now. And that's what catalyzed the podcasting, right? And I am who I am today because I quit drinking 4 years ago. But self-sabotage is rooted in your inability to love and show up for yourself. Because when you look back in life, nobody did that for you. So you had no role models. You had no references to how to do that. But as you said, action creates opportunities. And every crisis, right, in all trauma modalities, this is the first thing we're taught. Every crisis has an opportunity, and that's the post-traumatic growth you've been hinting at.
Yeah, which nobody wants to do. Myself included, man. You know, even being a single guy and dating again for the first time in a very long time, it's really about understanding relationship dynamics with myself first. And I believe what you just said. It's so funny you say that because I was having this conversation a couple of days ago with someone, and I said, if you don't love yourself, you'll never love anybody else. And if you don't love yourself, you'll never allow anyone else to love you. And you can feel the walls that people put up. People are more, again, what did I say earlier? People are more afraid of success than they are failure. God forbid you fucking let somebody love you. Jesus Christ. Oh my God. What in the world are you think? How dare you? You think you deserve love? Right? And so it's like, okay, why not? Give me all the, here's the game I always play with my clients. You give me every reason why you can't. And then I'll give you every reason why you can. And then let's decide which route sounds better. And that thing about compassion, I wrote a note here. Receiving love is at the core of our human experience. If you look at infants who are not held, they die, period. It's just human nature. We need it. We need love. We need compassion. I look at the values that I have in my life. As a man, my values are courage, love, strength, and honor. Love is a value of mine, not only in giving, but also in receiving. A lot of people are really, really great at giving and they suck at receiving because they're tied into love being an exchange. That somehow, in order for them to feel love, they must earn it. And I'm one of those people. I had to walk down this path to recognize that love does not have requirements to be earned. Love is innately a human experience. You can love people even when you hate them. You can love people just because they exist. You can love people for no other reason than you want to give them your energy. Receiving it, however, right? Receiving it is vastly more difficult because when you have been denied love, or love has been the precursor that you only get when you have earned it. The thing that your brain says is, I'm not worthy as is. And so now you're in this weird place where it's like, this is where you get overachievers. I'm going to guess you're an overachiever. I'm just going to like throw it out there.
Single
right?
mom, yeah, tiger mom households.
Yeah, but I'm an overachiever too. No mom, drug addict household, right? Earn love. Go and show me that you deserve. I'm not saying I don't know you, but that's what I'm saying. Like, you see this all the time, right? And so it's like, go and show me that you deserve my love. Get straight A's. Go be successful. Go over here. Follow that path. Do this thing. And it's like the elevation one must climb in order to continually feel love also becomes addiction. What do I have to do to feel? Whatever it takes. That is what I will do. And the receiving part of it, you will do. Here's what's so crazy about it, man. You will do whatever it takes to get it, and you will reject it because you have not understood something that is so incredibly important, that one does not earn love. Love just simply is. And that's what's so difficult. Dude, I struggled so much with this. dealing with a mother who was a drug addict and going to AA meetings with her when I'm like 8 years old and her looking at me and going, I'm here because of you.
Mm.
A grandmother who made me get white boy haircuts, even though I have this curly mixed kid hair. A society and teachers who said, you don't matter, you're not important. I literally had teachers call me dumb. Like, whatever math dyslexia is, how people can't read, I can't math. Like, it is so fucking confusing to me. And I don't even like using the word can't. I think it's a really gross word, but like my brain does not comprehend mathematical function. If you put a gun to my head and you're like, bro, solve this aquatic equation, whatever that word, I don't even know what it is. I'd be like, I don't know. Just take me now, God. and people put themselves in this situation where they're like, I will do whatever it takes to get validation from everyone else. And then I will get the validation. I will reject it because I don't deserve it. Because I only got it because I did all these things that they wanted. And it's such a subconscious game. And receiving love without sabotaging it, in my opinion, is one of the core tenets of knowing that you've healed. I really, truly believe that. Because at that point in your life, you will have recognized one inherent truth. I love me. I love me for my flaws, for my inadequacies, for the chaos that I bring into my own life, for all of the things that I am. And I accept it. And, you know, one of the things in AA is acceptance. Right. And looking at it, just going, if you can, here's where I always get caught up in AA, where sometimes I don't like it and I think it needs to be dismantled, is like, you can accept that you're an alcoholic, but you can't accept love. What are we talking about here? You can accept this negative connotation of a personal label, but you can't accept the greatest gift that you can know as a human being. Right. And so it's receiving. Well, how do you receive when you've only been told that you don't deserve it? You make a decision. And I know it sounds so simple and it's so weird to say this because I know it's true. You just say, I allow myself to be loved. I allow myself to be loved. Because if you don't do that, it will never exist. It just isn't going to happen. And it breaks my heart for those people because I used to be one of them. Reject the women who will give you everything. Reject the family members who still show up for you when you're a fucking dick. Reject the friends who got your back and want to push you into greatness when you're fucking your life up. Keep on rejecting. Again, all of this leads down a path, man. I'm telling you, at the end of the day, all of this leads down a very simple path. Are you going to regret your life or not? And I know that there are people who on their deathbed, they regret not going all in on love because they're scared. And it's sad.
I resonate with that deeply. My biggest kryptonite in my interpersonal relationships is disappointment. And I am a high achiever because I always felt validated when I was achieving something, right? Asian conditioning, even though not everything needs to be deconditioned, I like the collectivist mindset and certain things you can retain. And, you know, you can double down on it. But what I mean by that is my biggest struggle with my friends and even business partners is disappointment. You said this yesterday, and you said based on the meeting that we had, you were going to execute that by this time next week, but you didn't do it. And we already talked about it before. So what's going on? I told you I'm frustrated by your inaction, but you're doing it again. And I personalize it. That's another kryptonite of mine. And what I realized is, I am prone, I have increased propensity for disappointment because I disappoint in myself often. And this is where relationship is a projections of yourself. And I love what you said with relationships. And everything starts from the childhood, but humans are amazing because we are very malleable. And the fact that most of our behaviors are conditions, there's an opportunity because you can decondition it and rewire your way of thinking. And there's a lot of empowerment in that.
But it's about allowance, right? Can you allow yourself what you desire the most in the world? And allowing is very difficult when you come from chaos. Because if you're under, again, we're talking about this emotional home, right? And if you saw, for instance, relationships growing up with yelling and screaming and fighting and physical violence, what kind of relationship do you think you're going to end up in? One that is exactly like that. I had a relationship when I was in my mid 20s with this woman. Our relationship was unbelievably emotionally violent. We never hit each other. I will say that she smacked the shit out of me one time, but bro, I deserved it. Like for real, I would have smacked me too. But outside of that, like it was never physically violent, but it was so emotionally violent. And I looked at the way that her parents were, and I looked at the way that my parents weren't, and I was like, oh, this makes sense. We're talking about raising your standards. People settle all the time. They settle all the time for experientially based life, for an experiential based life, where they look at their life and they go, oh, my parents were a nightmare. They yelled at each other. They only stayed together for the kids. I guess that's what I have to have. Then we look at people who they're like, I only make $26,000 a year. Well, that's what my parents made, so I'm going to settle there. It's like, when are you going to stop settling? This is so difficult sometimes for me because I don't want to come off as preachy. Like I really, truly don't. But I'm like, motherfucker, look at what I've done. Look at what I've done. It is impossible that I'm here right now. But I did it because I decided. And where I'm going next is unbelievable. Dude, the plans I have in front of my life are unbelievable. I want an amazing wife and children. I want to make $1 million a year. I want to be on billboards in Times Square again. I want to be a #1 best-selling author again. I want to speak on the biggest stages again. I'm just getting started. I want to be in great health. I want great wealth. I want great relationships. And I'm not going to settle. I'm just not. I refuse it. I'd rather die than settle. And you have to adapt that mentality. One of the most difficult things that I had to bear witness to in childhood was lack. What do I mean by that? The 1st and the 15th were days of the month that were celebrated where I grew up, because those were the days that the government check came in. Those were the days that you got yours. What a fucking stupid way to think about the world. I'm not saying that's not beneficial for some people. If you're disabled, if you're sick, if I get it. I'm not taking that away from people. But if you're able-bodied and you have your capacities about you and you live in America, United States, the greatest country in the world, the only place arguably I can think of where a kid can grow up like me and have the life that I have, and your life sucks, it's your fault. It just is. But you haven't raised your standards yet. You have accepted the 1st and 15th. You have accepted mediocre relationships. You have accepted health that is not going to create longevity. You have accepted all of the things that you can actually control. So much of this conversation, Benoit, is really about control. Like it really is. And it's a dirty word. For whatever reason, it's such a dirty word in our society. Discipline, such a dirty word. Accountability, responsibility, such a dirty word. But people throw out, I heard this amazing quote the other day. This guy, I can't remember who said it, but he said, people throw around the word narcissist like they throw around the word entrepreneur. and what I think is so interesting about that, people throw out all these words all the time except the words that actually matter.
Yeah. Speaking of words, let's dive into that a little bit further. Michael, what is the difference between letting go and giving up?
Letting go is surrender, man. Like just looking at it and saying to yourself, it's allowing. I would look down at my hand and this finger, multiple skin grafts, multiple surgeries, knowing that my mother did it. And it was just such a crutch constantly. And then one day I was just like, how does this serve me? And letting go is like taking all the chaos of your life, all that stuff in that backpack that you've been carrying for years, hundreds of scenarios that just weigh you down, and just sitting the backpack down and just like, I'm done, man. I'm done. And just let go of it. It's freeing yourself. It's giving yourself permission to be free. Like, that's what life is about at the end of the day. It's freedom. You always hear this. What do people want in their relationship? Freedom. What do they want in their career? Freedom. What do they want in their health? Freedom. It's all freedom. But you keep yourself tied to these scenarios that you don't even have control over. Again, childhood trauma, man, you're not culpable for that shit. You're just not. I'm sorry it happened to you. But like, you're 38, you're 52, you're 24. You can do something about it. Right. And sometimes the doing something about it is going down the healing journey and then leaving it where it needs to be, compartmentalizing it and putting it on a shelf and saying, this no longer serves me. Take with me what I need to take with me and leave the rest behind. Giving up is for cowards. Giving up is for people who are scared, people who don't want to face reality, people who want to run, people who, like, in the worst moments want to blame the world and be the victim. You want to give up? Great. All right, good luck. I don't know what else to tell you, man. I don't have space for people who want to give up. But here's what I'll say, and I'll give some real dark context to this. I put a gun in my mouth when I was 25. I took a whole bottle of ibuprofen when I was 14. Like, I know what that feels like. And it is a very, very, very difficult experience for one to have. And I was giving up because I thought I was alone in the world, right? And I wanted to take and I say this through the context of my own lens. I'm not pushing this on anyone else. This is my narrative. I was being a coward. I had allowed all of the pain in the world to take me over. And instead of facing the dragon that was in front of me, I wanted to take the easy way out. I'm not saying that's not right either. Bro, I get it. Sometimes you're just done. I get it. And like, I respect it, even though it's a dark thing to say, because I've been there and I know what it feels like when you're just on the edge of all of this and you're like, I don't want this anymore. It is too much pain. It is too much hurt. It is too much suffering. But giving up, man, like when I look at it now, I just can't imagine it because here's what I think people really need. They need a couple of very small victories. They just need a couple very, very small victories that can ignite the flame in them, that can give them permission to continue to pursue whatever it is that's in front of them. And if you can get to that place, what I think is so magical about it is you'll look back and you'll go, I would never consider that again. I would never consider giving up again, ever. I'm going to fight tooth and nail because here's the thing. This is what's really fascinating. I've seen what both the best of life looks like. Dude, I know what it's like to fly first class around the world and eat the greatest foods and the greatest restaurants and $2,500 dinners and blah, 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 blah. And I know what it's like to steal food and to sleep back to back to back on a concrete floor with my little brothers with no mattress because we were fucking dirt poor and have rats and roaches crawl on us at night. Guess which one's better? But it took a lot of little victories to get to that. It took brushing my teeth. It took standing up for myself and learning that I was unbelievably codependent. It took the ability to go sit in front of a therapist and have a real conversation. It took truth and honesty and community and commitment and accountability and responsibility. It took investing time, effort, energy, and money. It took holding myself to a new standard. It took everything. And so when you give up, you lose. This is an infinite game. This is kind of how I look at it. One of the things that I have that is a dream of mine is I want to buy a lake house. And the lake house that I want particularly in this moment is $4.5 million. I do not have $4.5 million to buy a lake house yet. And on a long enough timeline, I will buy that lake house in this lifetime. Let's say, for instance, Benoit, that I buy that lake house at 78 years old. And we move in and I get one night's sleep. And I wake up the next morning and I'm walking out to get the paper and I die. I accomplished the goal, didn't I? And that's the thing when I talk about patience that people need. People want to give up because, and again, context, I get it. People want to give up because they don't have it now. whatever the it is. The podcast isn't number one. The books aren't doing well. The relationship isn't here yet. My health is off. My wealth is like whatever it is, right? If you can adopt this word yet and add it to your vocabulary, it will help you navigate the day to day. I don't have a $4.5 million lake house yet. I don't have a wife and kids yet. I haven't been a New York Times bestselling author multiple times yet. I don't care when it happens, dude. I just care that it happens. And if you don't give up, you don't lose.
I think the thesis of that, beautifully said, Michael, is this is the reason why we need long game perspective, which we connected during our discovery call a while ago. Have a long game perspective, self-grace, self-patience, of course, work ethics, discipline, that's given, right? During what we do. I think that's the only way to embrace the space in between the light and the dark. Because life isn't always the light and the dark. It's the in-between moments, the valleys between the peaks. And with all self-grace, self-patience, and I know your hard-shelved perspective that you talk about is based on a lot of truth. And because we need both, we need a gentle approach and we need a little bit harder approach. That's the nuances. And the podcast is about the nuances, but we have to start with self-grace and self-patience. Beautifully said.
And also recognizing that there's a vast difference between taking care of yourself and taking easy on yourself. Like even today, right? People be like, oh man, this guy is dealing with a sinus infection and he's on this podcast, but he's talking about self-care. And I'm like, you have to differentiate and understand that there are moments in you which you can, and you have to just tough through it. And there's moments in which you can't. Right? And this is a moment for which I can. Do I feel 10 out of 10? No, but I also don't feel 2 out of 10, because if I did, I'd be in the hospital. I wouldn't be here with you. Right? And so it's like, this is the thing. When struggle appears, people cower and they run. And that applies to a multitude of things. And for me in this moment, it's like, holding true. Here's what happens all the time is people will have a moment like this and they're like, oh, I'll reschedule. I'm sick. And then they'll just bullshit all day and they don't accomplish anything. And I'm like, I wanted to come here and show up and follow through and keep my commitment regardless of what was happening in my life, because that is a standard that I hold for myself. And if it were so bad, here's how I think. This is why I love that I played sports growing up. One of my coaches when I wrestled, Mr. Hollingsworth, would ask me, he'd go, are you hurt or are you injured? Because there's a very big difference. Are you hurt or are you injured? I'm just hurt. I'm just a little sick. If I were injured, I'd be in the hospital. Oh man, I'm like super sick. Hit me with the IV, get the doctor in here, give me all the things, right? And so I think it's still like sometimes you've got resiliency is the word that I'm moving towards here. Like you have to understand that if you want your life, you have to be resilient. The world doesn't owe you understanding. What if we didn't do this right now and I died tomorrow? And this is the podcast that somebody listens to that saves their life. Would I have fulfilled my legacy here? Would I have done the things that I said I was going to do? Would I have raised the standard for myself, my community, my family, my church, my commitments, whatever the thing is that I touch in my lifetime? Probably not. Because I had a little tickle in my throat. Right? And so it's like people are so quick to give up. And it's really at some points in this journey, mindset is everything. You can't see it, but in front of me, on my background, there's a giant 3-letter poster, 3-word poster, says mindset is everything. When I woke up this morning, I made a decision. I am coming here. I'm going to execute to the best of my ability. I don't give a fuck what is going on in my head. Let's see what happens. That's the same drive that I have about no excuses, just results that has led me to all the successes I have in life. And I don't mean successes. You could take away the billboards in Times Square. You could take away the books. You could take away the podcast. You could take away the money. You could take away the first class. You could take away the fancy clothes, the cars, all the shit that I have. You could take it all away. My success is looking in the mirror and respecting myself. And if you can get to that, you win. But you only get to that by being resilient. by holding yourself accountable and responsible and to the standard that you set. You asked me before we did this. Let's just call it what it is, because I think it's really important to be open here. You said, hey, are you sure you want to do this? Mm-hmm. You don't feel well. I said, yes, I committed to this. This is what people have to do in their life. Fucking commit to something, man. Commit to something. I get it. Life is hard. Great. So, what's your point?
I have a therapist of my own, just like I feel like all helpers also need a sounding board and a supporting space. I'm going through my conflict with my dad, my stepdad, and just a lot of details. And we have been talking for 2 years. As an Asian, Korean American, that's particularly difficult. And one thing that my therapist told me, and I want to share it here, I was asking, why me? Why is this happening to me? Based on my discipline, my profession, my cultivated practices, yada, yada, yada. She said, why not you? Mm-hmm. I was like, damn, what do you mean? It took me like a month to process and deconstruct that. But why not us? I think you talked about this on a podcast recently. Carrying the burden of our calling is a burden. Not everyone can rise up to the stance, as you talked about beautifully. But that's the burden that we're willing to carry because, as you said, we have our kryptonites. And if we do not choose our addictions and suffering, the suffering will find us. And so I just want to share that. But in light of this, I want to share 2 concepts that will drive your message home beautifully. It's the resilience versus anti-fragility. Resilience is what you said, your ability to revert back to the baseline of where you were after certain obstacles or challenges. Anti-fragility is you're not just reverting back to the baseline. Your capacity increases based on what you go through. And that's how I define emotional freedom, is you have this undeniable confidence and self-respect in yourself. Why? Because when I look back in the archives of my life, I see all these unshakable evidence that I showed up the way I'm proud of. So next time another crisis happens, because to your point, we're always reactive. We have to. Life's larger than we are. I have this confidence and self-respect that I don't know what's going to come my way, my dad or otherwise, but I trust that I will show up because I have these archives of evidence that support the fact that I will show up when life gets hard.
The only way you get to that is the little wins. And why is it happening to you? Because why not you? Why do you here's what I always think is so interesting is like, why do you think you're so special that you don't have to deal with the hardships of life? Why do you think you're owed something special or simple or not as traumatic as the next guy? You're not. You're a human. It's a human experience. And what's interesting is also it's like if you can remove yourself from it. I'm going to tell you something. If you can remove yourself from the idea that you are deserving of something more so than the next person, you'll actually find a lot of peace in life. And so I was in my therapist's office one day, and I agree with you. I think people who help people need people who help them. And if you don't have a therapist or a coach and you're trying to help people, you're a fraud. But we can save that.
Yes.
Yeah, we can save that for another day. And so I'm sitting in my therapist's office, and dude, like it's like another rainy Wednesday afternoon, and I'm sitting in the same chair, drinking out of the same cup with the same stupid chamomile tea, and like looking, the same bullshit every Wednesday, 5 p.m. And I look across at him and I go, man, I cannot fucking stand being here with you. I am so tired of looking at your face. And I said it like I wasn't joking. And I go, look, I'm not trying to be an asshole, man. I swear to God, I'm not trying to be an asshole. I'm so tired. These were the exact words that I used. I go, I'm so fucking tired of cleaning up a mess that I didn't make. And he goes, I get it. I get it. And he said, what's really interesting about life? He goes, I'll paraphrase this because I don't remember his exact words in this full context, but he goes, I've worked with so many people over the years, and they all have one thing in common. And I go, what is that? And this was his exact words. He goes, you can be depressed and still tend to your garden. Mm. And I thought to myself in that moment, I was like, that's really powerful because I was not happy. I was so tired of spending money doing CBT, EMDR, NLP, ABC, bro, everything. All the AA groups, SA, NA, LA Kings, like I did all the thing, right? I could sit here going to all of this, investing all of my time, all my effort, all of my energy, all of my money. And it didn't feel like anything was shifting. And I said to him, look, man, I get that, but I'm not depressed. I'm mad. And he goes, well, you should be. And I was like, oh, okay. And that singular moment changed my life forever, because I realized so much of this journey is about understanding that life is gonna life. And that statement I teach to my clients all the time. Life is gonna life, man. It's gonna life. It's gonna do the thing. It's this is so, I can't believe I'm gonna say this, but it comes to mind. It's like that Alanis Morissette lyric. It's like it's raining on your wedding day. Like, bro, it's be the best day of your life, and the fucking worst news will come. Life is not discriminatory. Trauma does not discriminate, no matter what aspect of it is. For some people, it's better. For some people, it's worse. For some people, it's this. For some people, it's that. We all have our own journey. But ultimately, what I took away from when he told me you can be depressed and still tend to your garden, and this was the thing that holds true to this day, was this concept that even though that happened, you can still live. So it's like, yeah, dude, you got to deal with shit with your stepdad. Great. Don't you have an amazing life? Aren't you grateful? Don't you have good things around you? Amazing fiance, future in front of you, done service that most people only dream can, have a career that you're proud of, a podcast that you enjoy. Yeah, so yeah, you got to deal with it. Good. Fucking go deal with it. Great. Good. I look at it, I go, good, deal with it, because then you'll deal with that. And then guess what? Here's what's really fucked up. You'll be like, I just dealt with that. And then the next thing's going to happen. You'll be like, oh my God, I just dealt with that. And then life is going to be like, good. That means you're ready for this. And that will rinse and repeat until the day you die. Life is going to life, man.
What do you think the difference is between grace and forgiveness for ourselves or otherwise?
I think grace is about allotting, right? And just giving space to something. I think forgiveness is choosing to no longer let something hold power over you. I think forgiveness is like, because for real, I mean this, like, I have to look at this finger, right? Every day, multiple skin grafts, it's all crooked, missing half the nail, it's discolored. I don't even know where this patch of skin came from. This could be from a dead body. I don't know. It could be cadaver. I just don't know. But I look at it, probably is actually, you know what I'm saying? This explains why I see ghosts all the time. and so I looked at this, and man, it held me back. It held me back so much. So much. I'll go back to my therapist again, because this moment was really, really, really helpful for me. He goes, have you ever considered what your mother's childhood was like? And I was like, holy shit. My grandmother was a crazy person, like legit. I mean, sane people, generally speaking, don't have copies of Mein Kampf in their house. I'm just saying, generally speaking, right? Unless they're like a fucking World War II researcher or something, right? And I thought about it. I thought about her upbringing, and I thought about her childhood. And then I thought about her grandmother and the generational trauma that impacts us as human beings. I was just like, you know what, man? I'm done carrying, again, the backpack mentality. I was like, I'm not going to carry this with me anymore. I just forgive her. Fuck it. Here's what's so crazy about this. Our ego has such a need to be right. Our ego has such a need to be offended that we will hold on to that anger, even though it's poisoning us every day, just to be like, fuck you. And we do that with all of these little things all the time that lead down the path of feeling this conviction that the world is against us. Like, fuck you, mom, fuck you, dad, fuck you, government, fuck you, school, fuck you, ex-girlfriend, fuck you, kids, fuck everybody. I'm right. And then what happens if you're paying attention, which you're probably not, but if you were, you'd realize that your ego is so driven to be offended because that's the moment in which you're like, I was right and I win. And when you win, you're like, I feel good about myself. And then you realize that it's a lie. And if you realize that it's a lie and you bring forgiveness into the equation and you just simply say, I let go of the power that your decisions hold over me, you will begin to find freedom. And what's hard about that, maybe you have the right to be offended. Husband cheated on you? Okay, I get it. Kids lied to you? All right. Parents stole from you? Okay. So, like, you can't change yesterday. I can't change anything that happened 5 seconds ago. I can't change anything that's ever happened in my whole life. And if you hold on to these things, it's like sipping a cup of poison every single day. You're just like, all right, I'm going to use this rage. I'm going to use this anger. I'm going to take it out on you, this vitriol. I'm going to make sure you know how offended I am about you. Sadhguru said something really beautiful once. He goes, why would I ever allow people to make me angry? Because when I allow people to make me angry, I relinquish my emotions to them. Mm. And that's the same thing that happens when you choose to not forgive. Now, the process to getting to forgiveness is very difficult. I don't think it's as easy as I forgive you, namaste. Let's move on, right? That's a lie spun through media. You see these on TikToks. Oh my God, I forgave my mom and my life was better. Shut up. No, you didn't. What you had to do is you had to go through this very tumultuous process of understanding, of healing, of rational thought and right thinking, of letting go, of putting the backpack down, of taking accountability, of looking at people's experiences and creating a framework for recognizing a pattern that was continued. And then 8 years later, you forgive. I think we would do people as mental health workers, both of us, you and I mean this to us, we would do people a tremendous amount of disservice if we didn't tell them the truth. Forgiveness is not as simple as I'm going to just forgive. It's not. And you've got to stop acting like it is. Forgiveness is a process like every other process that we go through. And grace, you asked me the difference between grace and forgiveness. Grace is allotting the space to open up your mind to the possibility of what you don't understand. And forgiveness is letting go of the emotional impact of other people's decisions.
I want to close out today's conversation, maybe on like a TED Talk podium moment for you, Michael. And I think forgiveness is especially close to your heart based on your mom's abuse towards you. I know you had a life-changing moment when you stood up for yourself and told your mom no more. And that's when your life changed. I want to ask you to share whatever comes to your mind and take this which you may. It's a vast question. What is the art of boundary setting through the lens of when did you come across this moment of grace when you finally forgave your mom or possibly still undergoing through that process?
My grandmother had a heart attack that led to her being in a coma when I was 16. I was the one who was home who called 911. My mother had been gone. She had moved to Florida because if you remember, there was a period of time where you could go to Florida and it was the Wild West. And you could go get prescriptions just by showing up. And my mother had a brutal Oxycontin addiction. Brutal. It was like what you hear about, what you read about, what you see in these TV shows and movies. That was her thing. She was so addicted to Oxycontin. Like, it was unbelievable. Dude, there was these pill bottles around our house constantly. So she disappears. She's down in Florida. She got married for like the 5th or 6th time, right? I don't even, like, I can't even get a date. And my mom got married like 6 times. Like, I don't even understand what's happening in the world. And so, and so she finds out my grandmother had this heart attack. My grandmother's in a coma. She comes home. She comes back to Indiana. She moves into my grandmother's house A couple months later, my grandmother had been back home. My mom had been sober. I'd never seen her sober in my whole life. Something happened when she got back to Indiana and she decided to be sober. My guess has been what happened was I put a restraining order on her and I was like, you got to get away from me. You're a fucking crazy person. And I think that was like a trigger for her that made her go and get sober for a while. And so that happens. She moves in as my grandmother's in recovery, doing a home recovery. She's on an oxygen tank. Dude, it's so much for a kid. Like, oh my God, dude, like even thinking about it's fucking overwhelming. And within a month, my mother was back to drinking a gallon of vodka a day. And I go in her room, something was off. I was like, I don't understand what's happening here. I'm going to go figure it out. Like literally, she would lock her door when she would leave. And I kicked the door in, like physically kicked the door in when she was gone. And I'm rummaging around trying to figure out like what is happening. There's got to be pill bottles here somewhere. Of course, lo and behold, there were. But behind this like tuck away closet thing she had, I don't really know how to describe it, just had clothes on it. There were probably no less than 10-gallon jugs, like half-gallon jugs of vodka.
Damn.
All empty. And I was like, motherfucker, again? Dude, you have to think, dude, this happened so frequently that it was normal. This is now the 20th time. Another rehab, another institutionalization, another night in jail. And I was getting done. Dude, I went berserk on her when she came home. And I started packing up all of her shit in the trash bags. I was like, you got to get the fuck out of here. And I understand. Here's what I understand now, obviously, looking back on this, 20 something years ago. My grandmother didn't want her to leave because it seemed to me, in retrospect, looking back on it, that this was her attempt at trying to solve the problem she had caused as a mother. If I give my daughter a place to live, even though she's a strung out junkie alcoholic, this will rectify my decisions or indecisions in her childhood. This is my assumption. I don't know. They're both dead, so I have no idea. There's nobody to ask. And so she ends up letting my mother stay for a little bit longer. I guess it's turned into my senior year now. So it's the front part of my senior year of high school. So my mom had been with us this happened in the summer, for probably about another 5 or 6 months, somewhere in that window. You got to think, dude, this was 20 years ago. I'm parsing it together. I'm going to close the loop on this. Trust me. My mother comes into my bedroom one night, wasted out of her mind. And she starts attacking me. And she's screaming at me about the computer. You have to think about how far gone this woman was. Like, she's so high, she doesn't realize that to turn on the computer, you just have to press the on button. Right? It's comical. Like, I laugh at it. It's fucking insane. And she starts physically hitting me. Now, you got to think, bro, I'm 6'3", 230 at that point in my life. I'm still the same. And, my mom was like 5'8". I'd never touched her once in my life. Not one time. She beat the shit out of me, dude. She let my stepdad beat the shit out of me. She let strangers hit. Like, I never, like, even when I got molested and I told her and she told me never tell anybody, I kept the secret. And that night I snapped and I kicked her to the ground and I stood over her and I looked at her and I said, if you ever touch me again, I'll fucking kill you. And I meant it. I would have fucking killed her if she ever touched me again. And that night, I finished where I started months earlier. I packed all of her shit into trash bags, and I physically threw her out the front door. I did not talk to her again, except maybe once or twice until the day she died. It is singularly the decision that has allowed me to be here with you today. It is the first time I really, truly stood up for myself. It is really, truly the first time I ever put boundaries in my life. And it is really, truly the first time that I ever put myself before someone else. Now, obviously, a tremendous amount of work was ahead of me. learning what boundaries really means, learning what self-care really means, learning what standing up for yourself really means. Like, there is a lot of work to be done from 18 to, almost 39. But I ended up doing that with her. I did that with my grandmother. I did that with my stepfather. I did that with a multitude of friends. I did that with anybody who did not serve the purpose that I was moving towards in life. And I still do it to this day. Bro, you're not being a passenger on my plane unless you're going to the same destination. It just is not happening. And I think one of the really important things that I took from that moment was, yes, it was something that, even though I'd put a restraining order on her, and even though I had tried to distance myself, it was that breaking point for me of a point of no going back that changed my life forever. And the hard part, especially when you're codependent, which I definitely was tremendously, I would let people back into my life and back into my life and back into my life. That's how you get in these really insane relationships in your 20s. I didn't know this, right? This is why the self-awareness play is so important. But ultimately, I think the thing that when I talk about boundaries and standing up for yourself that is so important is you must recognize when people do not have your best interest in mind. And I hate to break it to you, but that's most people. And the thing stopping you from success might be your own mother.
Yeah, beautifully said. And analogy, I'm very visual, just came up to my mind. I view boundaries, sure, there's like a pickle fence, right? I think most people's boundaries are all or nothing. They either have a stone wall of a castle built around, lets nobody in, going back to what we've been talking about the whole time, inability to let people in, inability to receive love. Or the other side, their doors are wide open. There's no lock on it. They keep their door open when they go to sleep. Nobody does that. I live in LA. You'll be insane to leave your door unlocked at night. But right. My question is, would you ever leave your door wide open or locked all the time? How do you get in and out then? And truth is in the middle. And that's what boundary setting is for me. And this goes back to your thesis, Michael, that little things that compound over time, which turns into confidence. If you never stood up for your mom, you never would have stood up for your grandmother, your stepfather, and so on, now in businesses and so on, right? And this is why people overestimate the power of like radical change, like anarchy, tear down the government, restart. But we know that sustainable change demands incremental progress. And we have to start small, give us a self-grace, and then let the grace and forgiveness be part of our lives. But I know I'm going to be on your podcast after this, but this will literally be a 6-hour conversation, but appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're spot on, man. And I think that's hopefully the key takeaway for people is just one decision. You're one decision away from your life being completely different. And if you look at your life today, let's say you made a decision today and tomorrow you make one and the next day. Over the course of a year, you will have made 365 decisions, or I guess 366 because we're in a leap year. So you get a bonus decision. You get a bonus decision. You cannot tell me your life is not going to be different in 365 decisions. You just can't. It's impossible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the book is Atomic Habits by James Clear. 1% incremental progress a day, you'd be 365% better by the end. And that requires self-grace and humility, right? But without further ado, Michael, where can people check out your TED Talk, your podcast appearances, your book, the movie, anything in between?
I'm everywhere at Michael Unbroken on social media. And then, of course, the podcast, Think Unbroken Podcast, wherever you listen to them, or just go to thinkunbrokenpodcast.com.
And I love the word unbroken. And I wish the hater on Facebook that say you're too ghetto to help people could tune in, just your ability to articulate, to distill and synthesize complex idea into practical terms. I appreciate what you do, and this was a long time in the making. So appreciate your time on a Saturday, your energy, your capacity to show up despite a sinus infection today.
I appreciate you, brother. I've been looking forward to this too, and it was phenomenal. I hope that you'll keep doing this for a very, very long time.
Here's to long game perspective. But to all the listeners, if you have made it till this end, I have one favor to ask. If you can share this episode with one friend, it's free for you, but priceless for the podcast's growth. As always, I'll link Michael's book, show links, everything in the show notes below. And as always, I hope to and encourage you to choose curiosity over fear in the next week's train of Discover More. Thank you for tuning in.